Do you think it's possible to view your role as a dad as sacred? That's what we're talking about this week. We are going to talk about how we can take our spiritual practices into our role as dad. I'm going to name 4 key principles that I actually take in my spiritual practice and how I integrate them in my role as dad. I think a lot of the times I come on here and I talk about worldly things, which are all very beneficial. They're all very essential, right? We talk about how as dads it's good to be in tune with your emotions. How as dads it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to tap into your masculine and feminine energy. Shadow work as fathers. We talk about all of these things and they are worldly things, but it gets deeper, right? And for me, I felt bad not really speaking my truth about how I show up spiritually and how it impacts all of those things I just listed. So that's what I want to talk about today, basically. And I'm going to give you 4 principles that I take and I put into my role as dad. So the first one is going to be the idea of non-attachment. Now, when I say non-attachment, don't think I mean, oh, I don't care about my kid. They're over here, I'm over here. I'm not supporting my kid. I don't care what they got going on. I'm not too attached to them. That's not what I mean. What I'm talking about is not clinging to a version of them that you like so much right now. Because the truth is, all things are impermanent, all things are destined to change. And if we cling to who our children are at a specific state, it's hard to love them unconditionally, right? Because we get to a point where we're just so clingy and attached to that version of them. Once they change, which they will, right? The things that they like will change. The things that they enjoy doing will change. The people who they hang around will change. How they treat you will inevitably change. It may not be for the worse, but it will look different as they mature and as they grow older and as they come into their own self, we should say, right? And if you are clinging to a certain version of them, once they blossom and they do the natural things that all things do, which is change, you're going to suffer a lot more. A good example of this is with my son. He is a basketball fanatic. He's also really, really good at the game of basketball. It's something that we bond over. We train together, we work out together, we watch basketball together. If my son should come to me tomorrow and say, Dad, I don't think I want to play basketball anymore. I think I want to look into creative writing or something like that. I would be crushed. I'm admitting this to you, right? I would be crushed. You know why? Because I've clung to that version of Caleb. I've clung to the basketball star version of Caleb because A, it I'm proud, but B, it's something that I enjoy, right? I love basketball. We have that in common. So the moment that he says, if he should say, this is not something I want to pursue, he's 13. This can change. So the moment he say this is not something that I want to pursue, I feel like I'm going to suffer. And being self-aware is everything. So even just talking about this and journaling about this, it can help me for if that moment should ever come, right? Another Caleb example is I remember a few years ago I got him a haircut. He's half Chinese and his hair was just all over the place. So I'm like, you know what? I told his mom I'm going to take him to get a haircut. She was not thrilled about it. Why was she not thrilled about it? Because she was attached, she was clinging to that version of him that was like her baby, like the wild hair kept some sort of innocence for him, I felt like, for her. And when I got his haircut, she was not happy about it. She wasn't visually to me like mad and saying things, but you can just tell she did not care for it. Fast forward, right now she's not clinging to that version of him. When I take him to the barbershop and she sees him, she is extremely happy about it. She thinks she calls him handsome all the time. So that's just an example of how we attach to a certain version of our children, and when we attach to that version, it just makes it so much more difficult for us to be okay when they transition into being into different things, liking different things, wanting to pursue different things. So that's the first principle that I carry from my spiritual practice into my role as dad is, trying my hardest not to attach and cling to a certain version of my children as they are now, because I know at some point it will change. And when it does change, I want to still love them just as much, right? I don't want to love my children based off conditions, right? Same thing with my daughter. Right now, she's in a phase of like, she cannot leave my ankle. She cannot leave my calf muscle. She cannot leave my waist. She just does not want to leave me. And at some point, I'm seeing it now. She's getting more independent. So I need to now try to assimilate to that version of her being independent. Sometimes I try to wipe her hands after she uses the bathroom with the towel. She's like, no, like I can wipe my own hands. And a part of me, it stings, but I need to release my attachment to that version of my 3-year-old that needs me to do every single thing for her. Does that make sense? I'm saying, does that make sense? Like, y'all could actually respond to me. So the second principle that I take from my spiritual practice into my role as dad is compassion. And when I say compassion, anytime anybody speaks to you about the word compassion, I hope they're telling you that it's always a two-way street. In my practice, compassion is uh, a huge role in my practice, right? You know, Feeling the suffering of others, realizing that we're all interconnected, we're all interbeing, but you can't be compassionate to someone else without having self-compassion. It just does not work. So with my children, if they are doing something that I'm like, "Bro, why are you doing this?" And if I could feel myself getting slightly upset, I have to tell myself sometimes, like, okay, and it's hard to do this in the moment, right? This is why we self-reflect, so the next time it could be easier to do it in the moment. What I like to call live action. So if I'm mad at my kids and I'm disappointed for whatever they may have done, sometimes I train myself to say, yo, how would I talk to myself in this situation? Right now, if my mind is in a really good state, I'm not going to beat myself up mentally, when I show up short in things in life. I'm not going to tell myself I suck. I'm not going to tell myself, oh my gosh, I can't do anything right. I'm going to give myself some grace. I'm going to be compassionate. That's how I want to show up for my children. But I can't show up that way if I'm not that way for myself. I want to say it's a proven fact, but nothing is really true proven. But you know what? Trust me, it's so hard. We'll leave it like that. It's so hard to be compassionate to your children if you don't practice self-compassion for yourself. So that's the second thing, being compassionate. Something that you can think about is like, okay, would I talk to myself this way? Right? If you are talking to yourself in a negative way, think to yourself, would I want my children to hear me talking to myself this way? Or would I talk to my kids this way? It's so easy to be a more understanding, a more compassionate dad when you are putting the shoe on the other foot and you're not in the heat of the moment situations. But when we get to the heat of the moment situations, how we show up is going to drastically change because of those moments where we're isolated, where we have the opportunity to truly self-reflect. So I would say the second thing that I take from my spiritual practice into my role as dad is trying to be as compassionate as possible and knowing that my level of compassion does affect how my children show up, not only to me, to themselves as siblings, but also when they leave me and they go into the world outside of our home, right? It makes a huge difference. The third thing is what we like to call right action. When I think about right action, especially in my parenting role, I think about, am I doing the right actions that my children can follow? So first I have to have this right kind of view of how it is I want to show up as a dad, right? I want to benefit others. I want to benefit my children in the best possible way. By having that understanding, by not attaching to who they are right now in the moment, right? By being able to understand compassion, I'm now able to act a certain way. And the way I want to act is I want my children to think that I'm leading a good example. That's what right action is, especially when it comes to this parenting thing. So, am I displaying patience? What's my tone like when I'm talking to them? These are things that we truly have to think about, but they become a way of life once we just dedicate some time to being self-aware about these things, right? So that's the third one, right action. Our influence on our children, sometimes we take it for granted. The other night I was having a conversation with my son, and we were getting like really deep. It was getting into a spiritual slash religion type of conversation, and he goes, "You know what, Dad? This may sound crazy, but I believe whatever you believe." And I'm like, he's 13 years old. Like, I am shifting his worldview, right? At some point when this was my practice, he was all in. This is what he's believing. Now I've transitioned into a different, my journey looks different spiritually. He's like, I'm rocking with that. He's like, I believe whatever you believe. And that is an immense amount of responsibility. We have to be mindful of how we're showing up in the actions that we're doing daily, because they look at us to say, okay, this is how I need to show up in X, Y, and Z situation. And the fourth principle, the last one, is presence over perfection. If you are a follower of my podcast, the Mindful Dad podcast, if you follow me on TikTok, you know that this is something that I stress a lot in fatherhood: presence over perfection. We know perfection is a myth, but when I say presence over perfection, I'm not just talking about, you know, your body, just I'm here, I show up here, I show up here. You see me, don't you? That physically you see me, don't you? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about true presence, right? True presence. That type of presence that makes your kids feel like they're not an annoying distraction, right? That type of presence that makes your kids feel like, man, my dad enjoys spending quality time with me. I'm not a task to my father. Presence over perfection. And when I say presence, remember, emotionally, mentally, and physically. That's how we want to show up for our kids. And in my spiritual practice, I look at it this way. If part of my routine is I'm meditating 30 to 45 minutes every morning, but maybe there's a few mornings during the week where I can't do that, that's presence over perfection. You know why? Because I still showed up and I did it for 15 minutes. I did it for 20 minutes. If I needed to read 20 pages of a book daily, but I couldn't read, presence over perfection, I still showed up and I still did that thing to the best of my ability. And that's how we want to approach fatherhood. You're showing up to the best of your ability. Like, sometimes people come on here and they talk about your role as dad, and they make it seem like it is just a one size shoe type of thing. That's not the case. Yes, we are all going through the same things. Yes, we are all interconnected. We're all interbeings, but paradoxically, we're walking our own unique journey. It's the hardest thing for people to grasp. It was the hardest thing for me to grasp. Sometimes to this day, I still have trouble realizing that. Like, you're listening to me right now because I said something that strikes a chord within you, right? So, boom. In that way, we are the same, but you're still walking your own journey. And that's why you got to remember to give yourself grace. You got to remember just to show up, but don't just show up physically, mentally and emotionally. And that's what I mean by presence over perfection. I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Please, if you enjoyed this conversation, I go a little deeper in my podcast this week, and I also have a guided meditation that I lead dads through, or moms, whoever listens, through on my podcast as well. So if you want to hear that guided meditation and just find some moments of stillness, I would advise you to check out my podcast episode. And my podcast is the Mindful Dad podcast. And before I get out of here, I just want to remind you all that the 365 Dad Journal is available for purchase. I went ahead and restocked, and it's on my website. This is an amazing Father's Day gift to give yourself as a dad. If you're listening to this and you are a mom or an auntie or Anybody who knows a dad and you know that they're on this self development journey where they are trying their hardest to show up differently, I would say this journal is just an amazing tool. When I created this journal, I was going through potentially the roughest times of my life, personally and as a dad. This journal has helped me so much. 365 prompts that I've written and created based off of my own experience as a father. I mean, this journal talks about mindfulness prompts. I have self-reflection prompts in there. I have prompts that helps us as fathers build our connection with our children, and I also have prompts that stress the importance of community and fatherhood. So check out the 365 Dad Journal. I'm sure I'll have that linked in the description. I'll catch y'all next week, man.